Two containers sit on a bench inside a German test facility. Two simple metal canisters, both filled with colorless liquid. They look identical. They look like water. One holds T-Stoff, 80% hydrogen peroxide, 20% water. The other holds C-Stoff, hydrazine hydrate, methyl alcohol, water. Both are odorless. Both are transparent. Both are hypergolic, meaning that the moment they contact each other, they react violently, instantaneously, without a spark. A ground crewman in a rubberized protective suit works at the bench. He reaches for one container. He picks up the other. He tips it. Aviation historian William Green later documented what the investigators found when they opened the shed door. Before the crewman had realized his mistake, his remains had been spread thinly over the entire test shed. This was the fuel Germany chose for the most advanced combat aircraft ever built. The aircraft is called the Messerschmitt Me-163 Komet. It sits on its ground dolly, a small, swept, tailless thing that looks like nothing else alive in 1944. Compact, swept, strange. Something from a different future than the one the war is actually happening in. 9. That is the number of Allied aircraft confirmed destroyed by the Me-163 Komet in more than a year of combat operations. 9. Here is what Germany paid for those 9. By 1943, Germany's air war is collapsing. Not dramatically, not in a single disaster, but steadily, the way a wall cracks before it falls. The United States Army Air Force's 8th Air Force is sending hundreds of Boeing B-17 flying fortresses deep into German airspace in daylight. Formation after formation, mile after mile of sky filled with American bombers. The Luftwaffe's piston engine fighters can intercept them, and do at enormous cost. Germany is bleeding experienced pilots faster than it can train replacements. The numbers are simple and merciless. The Reich cannot sustain attrition at this rate. Then comes the North American P-51 Mustang, fitted with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, carrying drop tanks, capable of flying escort all the way to Berlin and back. The Luftwaffe's interceptors are no longer racing against bombers. They are racing against their escorts. Germany needs something that doesn't play by the same rules. Something so fast that the entire concept of aerial interception changes. Not 30 miles per hour, faster, not 50, but a different order of magnitude. Something that makes Allied escort fighters irrelevant before the engagement begins. Germany has just the thing, or thinks it does. Alexander Lippisch is 50 years old in 1944. He wears wire-rimmed glasses and a dark suit. He does not carry a weapon, he carries a slide rule. His introduction to aviation came in September 1909, when he watched Orville Wright fly over Tempelhof Field in Berlin. A boy standing in a crowd, watching a biplane cross the sky, understanding in that moment that the sky could be made different. He spent the next 3 decades trying to make it so. His obsession was the tailless aircraft. Wings without the dead weight of a conventional tail assembly. Clean delta shapes that could slice through air rather than push against it. In 1928, he built a machine called the Ente, the duck. It became the first aircraft in history to fly under rocket power. Lippisch was the man who first put a human being on a rocket and got him to the other end alive. This distinction would follow him. Eventually, it would consume him. Working separately, a naval engineer and chemist named Helmuth Walter had spent the 1930s developing hydrogen peroxide propulsion. Engines that burned no conventional fuel, generated immense thrust from a chemical reaction, and could theoretically push an aircraft to speeds no piston engine could reach. His engines were compact, powerful, and they ran on T-Stoff. In January 1939, under a program designated Project X, Lippisch's team transferred to the Messerschmitt works in Augsburg. The tailless glider designer and the rocket chemist now had access to Germany's most capable aircraft production lines. What they also had was Willy Messerschmitt. Tall, angular, autocratic, a man who ran his company like a private kingdom and reportedly had little enthusiasm for a project he hadn't conceived. Lippisch and Messerschmitt clashed immediately, repeatedly, on questions of design authority, production priority, and engineering philosophy. People who later studied both men argued that if they had been able to work together, the Komet would have entered service far earlier. The weapon Germany urgently needed was being slowed by the people Germany needed to build it. It is October 2nd, 1941. The Baltic coast of Germany, Peenemünde, a long, flat airfield at the edge of the sea, the autumn sky gray and wide. Engineers and officers stand in a cluster on the tarmac, collars up against the October wind. A Messerschmitt Bf-110 twin-engine fighter rises into the air. Dangling behind it on a tow cable is a small, strange, tailless aircraft. The Me-163, unfueled, riding silently upward. At altitude, the cable releases. The Komet glides free. Its pilot, Heinrich Dittmar, world champion glider pilot, a man of exceptional precision and calm, the right man for the most dangerous aircraft on Earth, reaches for the ignition. The Walter motor fires. A blue-orange flame erupts from the rear nozzle. The Komet accelerates. The crowd watches it go. Then it is simply gone. A shape disappearing toward the horizon faster than any of them have ever seen anything move. The airspeed indicator passes 500 miles per hour, then 580, then 600, then 623.8 miles per hour, Mach 0.84. The fastest any human being has ever traveled in level flight. The crowd at Peenemünde is witnessing a moment that will stand as a record for nearly a decade. What they cannot see is what Dittmar is experiencing inside the cockpit. At Mach 0.84, compressibility effects slam into the aircraft. Shock waves form over the swept wings, disrupting airflow, locking the controls. The Komet pitches forward into a dive Dittmar cannot arrest. He cuts the engine. The world outside the canopy is a blur. He works the aircraft carefully, precisely, without the luxury of time or altitude, until the dive breaks and the aircraft recovers. He empties the fuel tanks. He lands. The crowd celebrates the record. Dittmar says nothing about what happened inside it. The compressibility problem did not go away. In 1944, Dittmar pushed a later model, the Me-163B, to 702 miles per hour and brought it back to Earth with nearly the entire vertical rudder surface torn away by flutter. The fastest aircraft in the world was being torn apart by its own speed. In Berlin, Luftwaffe leadership is electrified. The program accelerates. Dittmar's test flying continues. In August 1942, on a landing approach, the aircraft stalls at 12 feet. The Komet drops hard. It hits the ground with enough force to put Dittmar in a hospital bed for 2 years, his spine damaged. He watches the aircraft he has spent his career taming be sent to war without him. His replacement is Rudolf Opitz, phlegmatic, compact, the kind of test pilot who once landed a rocket aircraft in a turnip field, walked away from the wreckage, and apparently considered the matter closed. He will do. Stand at the edge of the airfield at Brandis, near Leipzig. It is 1944. Morning. The light is flat. Around a single Me-163 Komet, sitting low on its wheeled ground dolly, 2 separate fuel trucks approach from different directions. Every person within 15 meters of the aircraft wears a full-body rubberized protective suit. They move slowly. They move carefully. The first truck carries sea-stoff. The filling point is on the dorsal fuselage surface, just ahead of the vertical stabilizer. The hose connects. The fuel loads. The hose disconnects. The truck pulls back and clears the area entirely before the second truck approaches. The second truck carries T-stoff, a different filling point, a different hose, the same deliberate, unhurried motions. Both fuels are colorless. Both are odorless. They are indistinguishable from each other and indistinguishable from water. A single mechanical failure, a seam that has degraded, a fitting that has cracked, a moment of inattention, and the fuel that cannot touch itself will find itself touching. The pilot is already in the cockpit. He sits at the front of the fuselage, canopy closed. Directly behind his seat is the T-Stoff tank. A few centimeters of aluminum separate the oxidizer from his body. Lippisch himself, when asked what would happen if T-Stoff contacted skin, answered plainly, "If you stick your finger in it, then you get only the bone." This is what the man who designed the aircraft said about its fuel. Hanne Reitsch flies the Komet, Germany's most celebrated aviator, fearless, technically gifted, a test pilot who has climbed into things no rational person would consider. She flies the Komet, and the landing sequence nearly kills her. Months of surgery follow. If she could be nearly killed by this aircraft's most routine phase of flight, the Komet's appetite for human life had nothing to do with skill or courage. The landing is on a retractable metal skid. No wheels, no going around, no second approach. The touchdown speed is 220 kilometers per hour. The pilot commits to the approach at the moment it begins. A crosswind, a gust, a small error in judgment, and the aircraft rolls. The accident reports from the Komet program fill folders. Most of them end the same way. The Walter motor fires. The howl of it carries across the airfield. A sustained, high-pitched scream unlike anything a piston engine produces. The dolly separates from the aircraft and clatters back down the runway. The Komet accelerates, 31,000 feet per minute rate of climb. Service ceiling in under 4 minutes. 2 Mk-108 30mm cannons in the wing roots. The fastest aircraft in the world. Then, 8 minutes after ignition, the fuel is gone. The howl stops. The aircraft is now a heavy, fuel-empty glider falling toward a runway it cannot overshoot, with Allied fighters that have been circling at altitude, waiting for exactly this moment. 8 minutes. This is what they built. July 28, 1944. 2 B-17 flying fortresses of the 8th Air Force are flying their mission. Something passes them at a speed their airspeed indicators cannot account for. It has no propeller. It leaves a trail of blue-orange flame. It is gone before anyone can bring a weapon to bear. The reports reach 8th Air Force headquarters and generate the particular kind of institutional confusion that precedes genuine alarm. Fighters did not move at 600 miles per hour. This was known. And yet, by August, Jagdgeschwader 400, the only Luftwaffe wing to operate the Me-163 in combat, is based at Brandis with a full complement of Komets and perhaps 70 trained pilots. JG-400 is the Reich's answer to the question of what to do when the enemy owns the sky. It flies its first combat sorties and discovers, almost immediately, the problem the engineers never solved. The Komet closes on a B-17 at 600 miles per hour. The bomber flies at 160. The speed differential approaches 450 miles per hour. The 2 Mk-108 cannons fire at a slow rate, at short range. The window in which the bomber is close enough to hit and the Komet has not yet passed through, and beyond it is approximately 2.5 seconds. Less time than it takes to exhale. A burst, maybe 2, and the Komet is already a quarter mile past the target. Most passes result in nothing. No hits, no damaged aircraft. The Allied bomber crews, initially terrified, begin to understand. The thing that looks most deadly is the thing least able to hurt them. The P-51 pilots observe this. They begin to orbit at altitude above the Komet bases and wait. When the Me-163 returns from its pass, fuel spent, engine silent, descending on its committed glide path, the Mustangs come down. The fastest aircraft in the world, in the last 3 minutes of its flight, cannot outrun a piston-engine fighter that simply waited for the clock to run out. Then, in the same weeks that JG-400 is absorbing the dimensions of its tactical failure, Allied bombers strike the two main factories producing T-Stoff and C-Stoff. The Komets are grounded not by the enemy directly, but by the absence of the substance that makes them move. JG-400 sits at Brandis while the war continues above it. The kill count climbs. It climbs slowly. One confirmed kill, then another, spread across weeks and months of operations. 9 by the time it ends. The Komet was built to change the arithmetic of the air war. The arithmetic did not change. The accident reports tell one story, the aircraft holds another. The forced laborers who built Germany's aircraft, hundreds of thousands of men and women enslaved by the Reich, working in murderous conditions in underground factories and dispersed assembly plants, built the Komet too. Their names are not in any record that survived. Their faces are not in any photograph the camera thought to take, but they are present in what they left behind. The Me-163, held in the collection of the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, carries something no engineer intended to document. On the interior surfaces of the airframe, French writing, and wedged between the volatile T-Stoff fuel tank and a support strap, a rock, not fallen there by accident, not a manufacturing defect, placed deliberately by a hand that understood what the tank contained and what placing a rock against it might do in flight. Contaminated glue in the wing structure, a rock against a fuel tank, a note written in French on the inside of an airframe its builders believed would never be opened by anyone able to read it. German commanders, reviewing their accident reports, attributed losses to mechanical failure, pilot error, material defect. The Komet, they noted, was still maturing as a weapons system. These things happen with revolutionary technology. What they could not see was that some of those failures were not failures at all. They were deliberate. The weapon meant to defend Germany was being quietly unmade, one aircraft at a time by the people Germany had enslaved to build it. The Komet was not fighting one enemy. It was fighting several. Most of them were inside the aircraft before it ever left the ground. April 10th, 1945. 3 weeks before the German surrender, Lieutenant Fritz Kelb flies his Komet beneath the lead aircraft of a British heavy bomber formation. Inside the wing roots, the experimental SG-500 Jagdfaust. 6 recoilless mortars fitted there to solve the problem that no conventional gunnery could solve. A photo cell watches the belly of the aircraft above. When the bomber's silhouette triggers it, the mortars fire automatically, vertically. Into the target. The mortars fire. The bomber is destroyed. Kelb absorbs shrapnel from the explosion of his own target. His comrade Wolfgang Spater later sets down his account of the moment in 2 words. The Jagdfaust worked. It worked exactly once, on April 10th, 1945. Too late. The final accounting, more than 370 Komets built, more than a year of combat operations, 16 kills claimed by JG-400 pilots, 9 confirmed by Allied records. Between 6 and 9 Me-163s shot down in air combat, mostly by P-51 Mustangs, though one fell to a B-17 tail gunner. More lost to accidents. The fuel plants bombed flat. The bases overrun. In the final weeks, the Luftwaffe acknowledged what it would not say aloud. The Me-262, the twin-jet fighter developed alongside the Komet, slower but practical, capable of extended operations without the chemical emergency, was the more useful aircraft. JG-400 was disbanded. Its surviving pilots were assigned to fly Me-262s. The program that competed with the Me-262 for resources, for engineering attention, for production capacity, ended by transferring its survivors to the aircraft it had outcompeted. Germany sold Komet technology to Japan for 20 million Reichsmarks. Both submarines carrying the components were sunk in transit. An officer disembarked at Singapore with the instruction manual and flew back to Tokyo with it. Japan built its version, the Mitsubishi J-8M Shusui, from printed pages alone. 7 aircraft were assembled. 1 was ever flown. On July 7, 1945, on its maiden flight, the rocket motor quit after takeoff. The aircraft combusted during the emergency landing. The pilot died of his injuries. The Komet's only successful export was the manner of its own destruction. Muroc Dry Lake, California. May 3, 1946. The war has been over for nearly a year. Germany is rubble and silence. The Luftwaffe no longer exists. JG-400 is a paper record in an Allied archive. On the flat white expanse of the California desert, a Boeing B-29 Superfortress climbs into the morning sky with a small, swept, strange-looking German aircraft in tow. The Komet rides up on the cable, unfueled, its Walter motor cold and empty. At altitude, the cable releases. The Komet glides free. Test pilot Major Gus Lundquist has the controls. He does not fire the engine. The engine cannot be fired. The wooden wings are delaminating. Powered testing was planned. It has been quietly set aside. What happens over Muroc on this morning is simply the Komet flying as it was designed to fly in its earliest years. A glider, clean and silent, riding the California air back down to the desert floor. On the ground, watching, is Alexander Lippisch, balding, bespectacled, in a civilian suit on an American military installation. The boy who watched Orville Wright fly over Berlin in 1909, the man who built the first rocket aircraft in 1928, who spent a decade creating this machine, who knew what its fuel would do to human flesh and built the aircraft around it anyway, who argued with Willy Messerschmitt and lost months to it, who stood at Peenemünde in October 1941 and watched Dietmar break every record on Earth and nearly not come back. He stands on the Mojave and watches the aircraft he designed glide in silence. For Americans, on an empty tank, for the last time. The engine never fires again. 9 confirmed kills. More than 370 aircraft built, pilots dissolving in their cockpits, ground crews killed in test sheds, forced laborers working in murderous conditions, wedging rocks inside the fuel tanks of the aircraft they were building. The fastest aircraft in the world, caught routinely by P-51s that simply waited at altitude for the clock to run out. Lippisch's ideas outlasted the machine. His delta wing geometry is in the Convair Fa-102 Delta Dagger, in the Concorde, in the space shuttle as it glides back from orbit. The concept survived the war, the program, and the century. He spent his post-war decades watching American engineers discover the geometry he had already mapped. An aircraft he had no part in building. He died in 1976. The surviving Me-163s stand behind museum glass in Washington, in Dayton, in London, in Ottawa. Their fuel tanks are empty. Their cockpits are dark. Their dollies sit beneath them, inert. They look exactly as they always did. Small, swept, and strange. The tanks are empty now. No one standing near them is afraid.